The Coalition has previously said budget surpluses should be banked by the government to avoid causing more inflation. Yet this morning on Sky News, Susan Lee said more money should be sent to Ukraine. What's the economic logic behind that?
Well, interesting, isn't it, that there was additional $2 billion found down just, the back of the couch a couple of weeks ago to try and provide an incentive to the Greens to support Labor's housing policy. Now, that $2 billion wasn't in the budget just 6 weeks ago. Already, that budget is out of date. But it's not the first indicator that the budget's out of date. In fact, the budget was forecasting interest rates of 3.85% into the future. Well, that lasted less than a month before the RBA responded, and potentially may do so again next week. We'll learn today what the inflation rate is going to be, or has been, whether it's come down from those highs. There were 3 quarters with a 7 in front of them. That, of course, meant that the RBA had to respond with the one tool in its shed that it's got, which is rising interest rates. That's what's making Australians really feel the pinch, particularly mortgage holders and anybody that has a debt, business holders as well, pushing up rents, pushing up the cost of doing business. And of course, that's being passed on to consumers as the rising cost of living.
Do you agree, though, that more money should be sent to Ukraine? I mean, Susan Lee is arguing that a budget surplus should mean more money for Ukraine because it's immoral to profit from high commodity prices caused by the war. Where do you sit on this?
Well, certainly we know that supporting the Ukraine is a fundamental part of our national security imperatives. And in fact, the Labor government was elected knowing full well its commitment to Ukraine and has been a little slow dragging its heels in stepping up to that commitment. So we would want to see the Labor government meet its promises to the Ukraine. And I think that Australians would expect that. Now, should it be an additional expenditure? I think they've already promised a significant amount. We want to see what's been promised be delivered.
All right, so a possible surplus bigger than what was forecast. In your view, how short-lived is this going to be?
Well, we know already that it's only going to be this 1 year because Jim Chalmers' own budget has forecast deficits off into the future. And those deficits could potentially be worse if the economic situation deteriorates, if inflation is higher than expected, and if the RBA needs to shock consumers even more. We're already feeling the economy shudder to a halt. Our growth projections have come right down, and there's a number of economists out there now that are even forecasting a recession. Now, if we do get there, that's a recession that we don't need to have. It's being made worse because of the decisions that this government is making. The decisions that this government is making inflation stay higher for longer, which is meaning it means interest rates stay higher for longer. And of course, it's ordinary Australians, particularly working Australians, ones that hold a mortgage, that are paying the price for that.
You mentioned inflation. Of course, the latest inflation data will be released today. What are your expectations?
Well, I don't want to preempt what those figures might be. We do know that they were much higher than anticipated last month. Some of that was because of the reduction in the fuel excise. We would hope that we would see it come down. Quite frankly, if the government isn't doing everything it can to bring inflation down with the tools at its disposal by using fiscal policy, well, then it's simply turning over all the heavy lifting to the RBA, forcing it with the one tool that it's got, interest rates, to keep inflation under control. If you've got an expansionary budget, if you've got a government that isn't using all of its fiscal firepower to bring inflation down, it's like having one foot on the accelerator and one foot on the brake. And that's a terrific way to brake the engine. We'd like to see both fiscal policy and monetary policy work together, not against each other. That's the best way to maintain inflation, to get it back into that 2 to 3% band, but also to reduce the pain of the cost of living on all Australians, because the only way you can reduce the cost of living for all Australians is to bring inflation under control.
All right, look, I've got to end by asking you, we've got half an hour left before tickets to Taylor Swift are released, the pre-sale. Will you be getting tickets today?
Well, I would love to say that I would. I know that my daughter is desperate for me to do so. It's funny, you know, we were talking about how in other cities, concerts, Taylor Swift concerts as well as Beyonce's, has actually caused inflation spikes. You could see it in the data. Bringing concerts to Melbourne and to Sydney by Taylor Swift, you know, that's a great thing for our economy. I was speaking to some small businesses in the CBD just yesterday who were saying bringing those events is fantastic for small businesses, for restaurants, for hotels and tourism. But at the same time, we also know that there's a lot of Australians out there now that would have loved to have bought Taylor Swift tickets today, and they won't be doing it because a year ago they might have had the money to do it. This year they won't, and that's a real shame.
Yeah, I reckon still there's going to be pretty big frenzy in half an hour to try and get those tickets. Jane Hume, good to speak with you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Danica.